Hey guys, so for my allyship speech, I wanted to focus on ableism. I do have a PowerPoint, but I could not figure out for the life of me how to do it without it coming across as backwards, so bear with me. But if there is a picture or a graphic I want y'all to see, I will put it up on the screen. So to begin, what is ableism? Our book defines ableism as a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. So these can include things such as walking, learning, taking care of oneself, different things like that. So it's obviously varied and very complex. And I actually came across a little word picture that describes it that I thought was really good. And it says, ableism is a form of discrimination, the false idea that disabled people are by default inferior, when in truth, disability is just another way for a mind and/or a body to be. So when we look at the history behind the treatment of the disabled, at first it came across as through a religious lens, meaning that their disabilities were said to be a result of the sins that they had committed and that it could not be reversed. So in result, a lot of times children would either be killed if they were born with a disability or completely abandoned by their parents left to fend for themselves. And this is also where we see the word handicap originate. It originated in England, and it was when disabled would stand on the street corners with a cap, asking for money or food simply to be able to take care of themselves. And then we also saw in the late 1800s and early 1900s these things called freak shows, where they would take the disabled and put them in these shows because they were thought to need to be controlled, which is obviously awful, and to a point where they just continued to be segregated and discriminated against. So here's a picture showing some of those people that were involved in these freak shows. A couple of the people in the middle actually have had a condition called microcephaly, which is a condition that means a baby's brain and the head does not grow properly. And then the man in the black coat had no legs, which are just a couple examples of people that were included in these freak shows. So some problems that the disabled face include accessibility, acceptance, and myths. So when it comes to accessibility, I know a lot of the times, at least for me, I think of trouble accessing buildings because of stairs when you're in a wheelchair, different things like that. But they can have trouble obviously accessing healthcare, jobs, education, information in general. And then when it comes to acceptance, a lot of the times it comes from a lack of knowledge from people without disabilities. But it's very important to obviously recognize everyone's full potential and understand that their disability does make up part of their identity, but it does not encompass them, and it is not all who they are. And then with myths, a lot of the times it comes from misunderstandings or misinformation that does lead to these stereotypes. And here are a couple pictures, like I mentioned just a second ago, a person in a wheelchair being unable to get where they need to go because of the stairs. And then a pity party where clearly probably the communication isn't the way it needs to be, to where the disabled feels more so like it's a pity party instead of just regular conversation. And then I came across this little pin that said attitudes are the real disability, which I thought was a good point and a good thing to think about. And when it comes to statistics, roughly 15% of the world's population has some form of disability. So in a number scheme of things, that's over 1 billion people. And the World Health Organization also found that over 150 million adults have some sort of difficulty in functioning from day-to-day life, which they also went on to find that this makes people with disabilities the largest minority group in the world. And so here's just a little graphic that's specific to Canada but shares the same statistics as well as statistics that are specific to Canada themselves. And so what does it mean to be an ally for this group? First of all, allyship is defined as a lifelong process of building relationship based on trust, consistency, and accountability with marginalized individuals and/or groups of people. So we watched a TED Talk earlier in the school year by Stella Young, and it was titled "I'm Not Your Inspiration." She's a woman with a disability who went on to say, as I've mentioned earlier, that their disabilities do not define them, but rather it is a part of who they are. So we don't need to assume, but rather we need to educate ourselves and recognize our own privileges to be able to be the best advocates and allies we can be. And so here's a picture of Stephen Hawking, and it says a little bit him talking about his own disability. And then active steps to allyship. Obviously, different laws and amendments have been made working towards the equality in hopes of gaining more equality and access for the disabled, including the Americans with Disability Act, Americans with Disability Act Amendment, as well as different movements that have taken place over the years. But as an ally, we should not be afraid to talk about it. Rather from fear of offending or coming across as uneducated, we need to educate ourselves. Again, Stella Young from that TED Talk, she said, "A disability is not a bad thing, and it does not make one exceptional." So obviously, we need to approach it in a way of being open and honest with everybody and listen, educate, and include. And then, in summary, we need to advocate. Help them be aware of their own rights, raise awareness, and strive for that equality. So, obviously, I didn't get to talk about all the different physical and mental disabilities and all the different groups that it affects in different ways, but learning early on that people with disabilities make up the largest minority group in the world, I thought is obviously very important that they also have a voice themselves, and it's important to ally with them just as it is important to ally with any group that needs it.
So here is just a list of my sources. I wanted to say thank y'all for watching, and I know that these times are crazy right now, and I hope you guys are all doing well, and thanks again.